Thank you. I'll be relatively brief. First, I want to congratulate the students who organized this conference. It's really timely and very important. So congratulations and thank you for that, and bringing some of this dialogue to MIT is also helpful. I first became aware of what was going on in Colombia when I was an adjunct professor in the 1980s at Hunter College in New York. And many students in my class got up and said, you know, I'm from a small town outside of Medellin, and I saw 40 people in my village killed. And there were many stories like that. And like many people, I thought things had improved because I didn't hear much. As in the 90s, you know, in the early 2000s, I didn't hear as much, and I thought things had improved. But I work with a number of organizations in the United States, such as the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists and others, and a gentleman in the back, Marino Cordova, from Colombia, some of you heard him this morning, has done a really good job at educating us, many of us who work in the United States, politics or in labor, that know maybe the location of the violence has changed, but actually there are massive problems of violence and displacement and marginalization and racism in Colombia. So at his urging and that of others, such as a former fellow here at MIT, Paula Moreno, me, and an organization in our Department of Urban Studies at Columbia called the Community Innovators Lab, and 3 of the people who work there are sitting in the middle right there. We only recently began working in the Pacific region of Colombia. And what we did was to ask different leaders of civic organizations, activists, some business leaders, civic leaders, religious leaders, and others, to join a process with us to really, in the Pacific area, Pacific Coast region, to really think through the future. And so we got 300 applications from people or so who wanted to join the process. And out of that, we decided, collaborating with some other folks, we came up with a list of 60 folks. And we began intensive meetings and conversations in Colombia with those folks, first in a couple of week-long workshops, to really try and understand what it is they're trying to do, what are their issues, what do they want to talk about, what are key things that we could all work on together. And so out of that initial process, we had a second follow-up process with about 30 of those leaders, and then we've continued to have ongoing work to define collaborative projects and also conversations that need to be held. So I'm in a learning phase, very much so, and I will say that I observed are, one, lots of inspiring, courageous young leaders like this young woman next to me, which has been, you know, fantastic. Just to be there working with these kind of people. But what Afro and indigenous leaders in the Pacific region asked of me first, and what they wanted to talk about, was lessons from the civil rights movement in the United States. And how did African Americans in the United States overcome marginalization, invisibility, all those kinds of issues, lack of self-awareness or self-confidence that come from marginalization. How did Africa deal with those issues historically? And what can be learned and shared from here with folks in Colombia? So the first thing I would say is along those lines, and what I said there, is that African Americans are still struggling with those issues in the United States. And if you go throughout the Americas, you can start in Canada and work your way down to Argentina. Every country you go in, if you look at who's at the bottom of the economic and social ladder, it's people of African descent and indigenous people in every single country, without exception. And so the struggle for full citizenship and inclusion post-slavery, post-genocide against indigenous peoples, that struggle is not over. And we all need to grapple with those things. And we are still struggling with those things in this country. That's one. Second, part of my motivation for this work is there are at least 120 million people of African descent in the Americas. But we share music a fair amount. People in Colombia know what hip-hop is. They know what rap is. We all know what, Afro jazz, Latin jazz. We share music. Even us here, we can dance, to the South. We can do that. But we don't share politics. We don't know a lot about each other's struggles, nor do we support each other very much. And we don't collaborate economically. And so those are things that within, folks from the African diaspora, I think it's important that we begin to work on that because we can help each other in those ways. So that's one theme we've talked about quite a bit. Another thing I would say I noticed that's really strong in the Pacific region with the Afro and indigenous people, there's a very strong environmental consciousness there. So many people got up and talked to us about how important it is to appreciate the value of biodiversity, of the natural landscape that's there, and how important it is not to pollute the rivers, to tear down all the trees, but to actually think through how to sustain that, because that is the way in which people in that region are actually going to grow economically in the future. And, it was amazing to me that these folks had this awareness, and you have environmental movements in Europe and the United States with no connection to these struggles that are going on there, even though some of the people fighting hardest for those values are actually right there in the Pacific region. So, I thought there's a lot of possibility there for making connections. And then we saw there, we read the mission statements of a lot of grassroots organizations in the Pacific region. And I showed it to Dana Cunningham. She's sitting with her hand in her head like that, right there. And we read those mission statements together, and we agreed that these were some of the deepest found statements of purpose and what community means, what working together means, what building a future together means. These are some of the strongest statements we had ever read from any organizations anywhere. And so meeting with these women's organizations and peasants organizations, other organizations in that region, the power and determination and the amount of work that's already been done to organize folks on the ground is really impressive. What we're trying to do is to actually just build connections. Many of those folks have really good ideas and have already started cooperative businesses in, food production or in products from the forest that can be marketed, or, in many other areas. Collective that has a bunch of restaurants and other establishments that are ongoing. So we want to build on those. There are a lot of ideas around ecotourism for the future there, and a lot to build on there. We want to help connect people with those efforts, and we think that we have already done outreach, and we're planning to, have a business fair where we'll bring in outside folks who are interested in investing in these things, and mainly just build the connections and partnerships. So that's one thing we're very excited about. The other thing that we're working on is actually trying to help create a space for civic strategizing, planning, movement building in the Pacific region, just helping those folks with that effort. And I actually think that is the most important thing that we can do there, because without that kind of participation and thinking and collaboration and input from the region, I don't think that all of the planning and good intentions that may or may not be there from Bogota or from Washington, D.C. or New York or whatever are going to make a huge difference, because with those intentions and thinking come a lot of the problems that the folks in the Pacific region are dealing with right now. And it is critical for folks to be able to plan and plot their own future and own destiny. So that is something we're trying to help with, and we're committed to helping with that. I had a conversation with one person, a former senior government official, and I met with him, and I was talking about energy issues in the Pacific region. And he said, yeah, we need a massive dam, and we need a massive power plant with a dam, and that's exactly what would destroy the ecosystem, the environment, the way of life, and you don't need it. There are other ways to develop energy, and the World Bank is famous, and organizations like that are famous for these massive mega projects where all of the contracting firms come from US or Bogota or Europe, where all of the planning is done from the capital, where the local people are supposed to be real happy because they're going to give them electricity, but they don't own any of it. And they're as poor after the projects are finished as they were before the projects began. And there's a lot of that kind of thinking that I've observed in Colombia right now. And when local people, and then I guess there's been enough criticism so that the government and some of these agencies say, we need some black people to bless this, or at least look like we're working with the black people. And so they invite some black people to be part of the process, and literally none of the black people are getting paid. All of the planners for the government and these other associations, the white people, I hate to say it that way, but they're all getting paid. And the black people are asked to volunteer, and that's supposed to be an inclusive process. We're very familiar with that kind of thing in this country. The tokenism that's involved here. All you need to do is walk around America. Black people have been here. How long have we been here? We came on the same boats. We've been here a long time. This is the richest country on earth. And all you need to do is walk, 20 minutes from here and you see black poverty. Right? So we know all about tokenism. And frankly, what I see is a lot of that going on in Colombia right now. So hopefully we can change that, because there really is a bright future, I think, if we can kind of leapfrog a lot of these problematic ways we thought about development in the past and directly engage people and directly tap into this youthful enthusiasm and energy and intelligence and brilliance that's on the ground in these communities, really value that and connect with that. There's so many things that can be done to really change Colombia and change Latin America and change Americas, all of us for that matter. So a couple of things I want to end with. One is that obviously ending violence is critical, and the peace in Havana is critical. As far as I know, and maybe others here know better, I did not meet any leaders from the Pacific region or dispersed people from the African diaspora in Colombia who are engaged in the peace process. They're not at the table. Even though a lot of the combatants are from that region, even though a lot of what's being discussed are like who's going to get what in that region, the people who are there are not at the table. And to me, that symbolizes everything else I've been saying all along. I don't know how you have a genuine peace process when you don't actually involve the communities and the people who are most affected by the violence, by companies running people off their land to grab their resources. I don't know how you have an effective peace if you don't engage those folks. What are you reintegrating the former combatants into? You think reintegrating people into poverty is going to solve something? That people are just going to be happy with that and they're just going to go and just lay down their arms to be poor and borderline starvation? You think that's going to solve anything? Obviously not you. I don't think so. And that's how, if you want an example of why that doesn't work, just turn on CNN and look how it's not working in the U.S. How not involving communities in problem solving around policing or job creation, just see what it leads to. So hopefully we can, help. And the one other thing we're going to do is an organization I work with called the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists has decided to organize a delegation of black labor leaders and some elected officials to go to Colombia this soon to bring more attention and focus on this issue, and also to let everyone know, including our president and people who want to be president, how strongly we feel about justice in Colombia, and how we do not view this as a struggle. We view this as part of our struggle. We are part of this diaspora, just like Jews feel connected to Israel. It's not a separate identity for us. This is not a separate issue from our history, our legacy. It is part of our struggle, and so we do not plan to sleep on this issue. Thank you.